Trees podcast is absolutely stoked to be joined this evening with Murphy Murray.
Happy to be here.
Right on. Thanks for joining us to talk about extractions and in particular hash. Murphy, I'm wondering if you could weigh in on how you would inform a consumer about what to look for when trying to select quality hash.
Well, I would start by asking a bunch of questions. I think one thing we've all agreed upon is that cannabis treats everybody differently. And so in order to achieve your goals, we got to figure out what your goals are. And, those things are very different from, a medical patient who's consuming 10, 15 different times a day versus a recreational consumer who doesn't even smoke every day, maybe just has like a heavy usage on Friday type of thing. So, the type of consumer you are and the frequency with which you're consuming, even the equipment you're using to consume really is going to impact that choice first and foremost. Because if you buy something that's really designed to be dabbed, and your goal is to put it into food, then, you're going to be spending more money than you should. You might be getting compounds that aren't palatable, and also the opposite is true. If you're trying to dab and you're buying, basically isolates, then you're not going to get as complex of an experience as you might otherwise. So figuring out what your actual goals are is really key. And sometimes that can be hard because we have multiple goals. A recent study, demonstrated that most recreational consumers are still using for medical reasons. And so, it's easy to, assume that these should just be different people. We want to think about a terminal patient and this young, healthy partier. And it's just not that simple. A lot of us are doing both. And the products that I would choose for my recreational enjoyment are not the same as the products that I look for to, treat a medical condition. And so, starting there is really key. And I think for especially patients in Maine where they're just approaching the possibility of rec, it's going to take a little while to see that unwind and kind of figure out who everyone is.
Certainly. Yeah. It can be kind of confusing when you have addressed something as medical for so long and then kind of just, actually now go ahead and use it recreationally.
Yep, exactly. And it's, it can be confusing from a regulatory perspective as well. And so we end up seeing these huge discrepancies between what's important to consumers and what's important to business owners. And all of that is usually negated by what's important to politicians, right? So we're all fighting with but against each other in a lot of ways. I think the perfect example of that is that medical products in many states have less strict testing requirements than recreational products, which is a terrifying concept and just proof of that disconnect between a politician and a patient, because that politician's listening to the business and the business is saying the medicine will be too expensive if you impose these burdens on me.
Yeah, it's a backward system that's money driven all the way around.
Yeah, exactly. And even people with good intentions can still only really have good intentions for themselves. It's really hard to be a business owner and not relate to both the struggle of a patient wanting to pay less for quality meds and the struggle of a business wanting to have a lower overhead to deliver those meds. And then the struggle of a politician saying, well, I just don't want to be held responsible for any of this. So, what's my liability card? And it works against you in a lot of ways. So, normally my first piece of advice to someone who wants a concentrate for medical use is look for testing. And in many states, that's literally not even an option. So if you're in Maine, your medical products have not been required to be tested at all this whole time. And that would be very stressful for me for a medical consumer because the frequency with which they're consuming these products is so much higher that minor contaminants are more important to those medical patients. And the recreational market addresses that because the political, infrastructure of things like alcohol call for a lot of testing. The political structure of things like pharmaceutical medicines call for a lot of testing. So it's really easy to mirror that for rec. But the medical market has, developed outside of that, framework first. And so it can be really hard for patients to even know where to begin with that. Not to mention, a lot of the testing is very potency focused, which is the least important information usually.
Right.
I can tell if there's THC in there just by smoking it.
Right.
So,
Right.
so that's not the one that I need compared
Right.
to something like heavy metals or pesticides or mycotoxins.
Or
If you're a
terpenes,
medical
right?
patient, even terpenes, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I want to know everything that's in there. And you
Mhm.
wouldn't buy a loaf of bread that didn't list ingredients because you're used to expecting that kind of standard conformity from your food products.
Right.
And the only alternative to that is when you go buy bread from the manufacturer directly. If I go to a bakery and I buy your loaf of bread, I'm not going to ask you for what type of flour you used. But if you
Right.
want me to buy it off the shelf, I want to know, and that's exactly the type of attitude that I would bring to purchasing cannabis concentrates, is that you need to either know your source personally in a way where you can reach out to them and ask questions, or you need so much transparency in their manufacturing process, on their label, on their website, that you feel confident in the information that's being given to you.
For consumers who are trying to select really well done solvent based extracts, are there things that you can point to that they should steer away from if they can see, smell? Basically, those are the only two senses that they'll have access to in a caregiver storefront or a dispensary. Are there things that you think that generally they could kind of pick up on to steer away from?
I mean, there's a pretty short, but I think fairly well-known list of things that we know we 100% do not want in our concentrate. And so as a general rule, anything green is not going to be high on that list. As a secondary general rule, I would say that anything that is gimmicky, like if you come into blue, pink, purple concentrate, some of that weird stuff, I would go ahead and pass on that, at least for the first time as well. There are legitimate reasons why you might have something that's pink, but or purple, but generally it's not a product that, if it was not
Tropicana cookie.
colors, I wouldn't go there. Yeah.
There's only a few strains that stick out to me that make purple concentrates. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And especially with solvents, that's something I can do to anything. So I could make any product appear purple if I wanted to. And so in that way, it's not a trustworthy factor, because it's just my influence on it. It's kind of like putting sprinkles on any donut. Like, sprinkles are good, but if the donut is not also good, then those sprinkles meant nothing to me. So,
Right.
you want to kind of avoid trusting color as much as possible, outside of knowing that like green is bad, and anything too rainbow oriented is going to definitely be risky as well. From there, other appearance things that you can pay attention to get a little bit trickier, because in the realm of solvent extracted products, we have a lot of influence over the physical consistency of the product. So whether it's very hard and dry, or whether it's wet and sticky, or whether it's wet but not sticky, for example, like there's a lot of different things I can do to impact that texture. And most of them are just aesthetic. Most of them don't have any real impact on the chemical content. It's just, like the difference between a wet batter and a dry batter might be a small amount of terpene content, but really not much else. The difference between, shatter that's very sticky and pulls apart like a goo, compared to shatter that breaks like solid glass, is usually, fairly, we're talking like third, fourth decimal points, very insignificant changes in your primary active ingredients as far as your cannabinoids and your terpenes go. Those tend to be fairly consistent across multiple textures. However, some of those textures can point to, whether a product is mostly cannabinoids versus mostly terpene content. That's where stickiness is actually really important. Delta 9 is very sticky. And so that's hash that's going to be very dense. It's going to stick to everything. It's going to stick to the inside of your container. And THCA is a crystalline solid. It is not sticky at all. So THCA between my fingers is dry. I can wipe it off. Delta 9 between my fingers, I've got to go and get the ethanol. That's not coming off. Right. And so in that, in that regard, knowing how much of your product is activated already or not might be very important to you, and can have a huge impact on that consistency. If I've got something that is very liquid and not very sticky, that could imply really, really high terpene content. And if it does, you'll know because you can smell it. So that one's an easy one to pick out. If it doesn't smell very strong and it's not very sticky, then we know it's not Delta 9 content. And then now we start looking at, is this contaminants? Is this wax? Is this water is this, other categories of things. THCA is very dry, usually crystalline. And so, you're going to notice high THCA ratios in anything that's diamonds, anything that's sugared. A lot of rosin is going to be mostly THCA as well, because it'll be nice and dry. Whereas that greasy rosin is usually a little bit of Delta-9 in there. And so that's just a consistency thing for you as a consumer. A lot of times we think we want the THCA, but in order to smoke the THCA, you do have to decarb it in order to consume it. And that results every time in a 12% loss of max. It's like 11.8, but we'll call it 12. And so if I'm going to buy THCA, I'm actually buying 12% less than whatever that weight is in terms of when I finally inhale it.
Right.
So
that cuts into some overhead.
Yeah, exactly. And so a little bit of Delta-9 actually does go further as far as your money is involved, because it's already active. These are just kind of aesthetic preferences, but they're the biggest influencers on that, physical consistency. If I want something to stay homogenized, I'm going to make sure that it's partially Delta-9. And if I want something that separates in really, creative ways, like having diamonds versus liquids, or having, like a real sugary consistency, then I want as little Delta-9 as possible. So, it's really just a decision about how I want it to look at that point, and not so much about what the consumer's getting, because the jar I start with is the same either way,
And most of the jars all look the same except for the labels.
Right. Exactly. So that makes that physical appearance usually just not a quality data point.
However, that seems to really drive the market in caregiver in storefronts, dispensaries. It's all behind the glass anyways, for the most part.
Oh, for sure. And it works, because you look at the hamburger on a fast food menu is not what you get in your bag, but the way that it looks on that menu is how you decide which one you want. Like that appearance drives most of our decisions. It's really hard to get away from that. And so in that regard, like, prefer whatever you want. Generally, that appearance does not have a significant impact on the quality of the product.
So with consumers in mind, how is it that you determine quality hash, Mega?
I guess I would go into the store and just, kind of ask to see what's there. I would just go by smell, probably best. And look, it's really just kind of depends what you're looking for. If you're looking for like a gassy strain, or you're looking for a fruity strain, it's important to ask questions, I guess, to the bud tender and see if they can give you any more background information. It's really just like with the flower, man, it really comes down so much to personal preference. What might be one person's cup of tea and their favorite, and like the new best thing they've ever tried might kind of just be like not the favorite of someone else. So that's one thing I've found is like a lot of the kind of more big name stuff that's kind of come from California recently, like the purple punch and the wedding cake. And I think, don't get me wrong, I think both of those strains are great, maybe in crosses with other stuff, and I think they have a lot of potential. But to me, neither of them were really something that I would per se seek out for my personal use, just because neither of the examples that I've seen available to me on the market have been stuff that I've really personally enjoyed or been seeking out. I think the wedding cake, it's an incredible strain, has a lot of potential. Obviously the flower is speaks for itself, and I think purple punch is really fast flowering, has really great bag appeal. Same thing, the flower kind of speaks for itself in some. But in terms of the concentrates, those are two examples for me that haven't really ticked the boxes that I look for, I guess, for my own personal thing, which is so much my personal preference for flavor. And also, everything's going to get you a different degree of stoned or, high. So yeah, I think a lot of stuff kind of just doesn't really hit super hard. So I also now, flavor is obviously something I'm looking for, but also, potency is a big thing, and I think I'm definitely trying to seek out those ones that are, really hit as a concentrate.
It is very subjective to the user, and I feel like a lot of times when people are going into a storefront to try to pick up, let's say, a gram of hash rosin, the price tags, usually pretty steep on a quality gram of hash rosin, and then they may have a little bit of difficulty sussing out what it is exactly that they're looking for without doing a fair amount of research into what's the strain, who did the wash, who is the grower, and then maybe trying to put a nose to the jar.
Yeah, I think all that, definitely great ways to go about it. And yeah, it's obviously you got to be discerning with the price points being pretty high for this stuff. From a processing standpoint, some good information for the consumer is, I mean, in some cases, we have stuff that washes back at like 1 or 2%. That's really not a good viable washer. And in those cases that I've had things that have done that, can't go out there and sell it for 2 or 3 times the price of the market rate for what rosin is selling for. So in some cases, yeah, you kind of have to take the wins and the losses with this kind of solventless processing. But yeah, as it's evolved, much more people have kind of identified and done breeding to try to isolate more solventless processing in mind strains, I guess. So
Rita, I had a question for you. With consumers in mind, how do you determine quality hash?
I think it really boils down to the trusting the source would be kind of the short and sweet of it. And knowing the grower, the processor, even the breeder. I mean, they all play in line. Like when I wash hash and it's really good and it turns out well, it's all credit to the grower. It makes my job easy and it really lets clean, proper medicine shine through. And so I think if you find a grower that you really like, it's going to take some trial and error, and then they have some concentrate or rosin or whatever it is available, then check them out first and just kind of go with who you trust. And there's always going to be trial and error, but I think going with your personal favorite is always the best place to start.
So people would need to find out what their favorite is? That's
kind of a tough question there. If you like your favorite, if your go-to is Humble Family, for instance, and then you are looking at the rosin selection and you see some Humble Family, or then that would be my go-to for a first try. Something you're familiar with and you trust the source, you trust the grower, it's good, clean medicine. And then that is what's going to translate over into the hash, is that good, clean medicine. So if you can't find your favorite grower, then maybe look for your favorite strain or something that you're familiar with, just to have kind of one leg in the door at least when you're searching for that first concentrate purchase.
With consumers in mind, you're saying that trusting the brand is really the way that you think that people can.
Yeah, I think that's a good first step into the hash when you're buying your first gram of hash, because it really is, it's going to be, one of the more expensive things on that shelf. I've been there. I know that first hash rosin or old school hash purchase, and it's a big one. It's something that's going to stay in your box for a long period of time. And so you really want it to be worth it. And I've had several times where it's just not worth it. When you go out on a limb, you try something new, a new company you've never heard of, and it just doesn't turn out to be what you thought it was. So a good way to avoid that would just be to find either a brand that you're already familiar with, or play that trial and error game until you find something that you like, something that you can go off of, and take that and run with it.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Great Lakes Grease.
Honored to be here.
I wanted to pose a question to you. With the consumer in mind, how do you approach buying quality hash, and in particular, hash rosin?
Well, as far as buying it from a store, the first thing that I would look for is I would look for it to be sourced and to know where it came from and how it was grown as well, because it's very important that it was grown naturally and organically, because you're going to be consuming it and you want to know where it came from. The other thing I would look for is how they're storing it in the store. Are they storing it on the shelf at room temperature, or do they have a hash refrigerator or cooler or something like that where they are keeping it cold and preserving it better while it is on the shelf? Also, I would definitely recommend that a lot of shops kind of have a sample jar to where it is out at room temperature, to where they can open it, and when a patient comes in or a consumer comes in to look at their products, they can actually see it, open it, smell it, because it's very important, because everyone's different. it's very important that you are able to smell the terpenes and you are able to look at the product, because one terpene profile for someone might be completely different. Their preference might be completely different as for someone else. So it's very important that like when you do smell it and when you do see it, that it kind of moves you. It kind of you feel the energy from it, and that's what you want. And then maybe you can take some of that home, but buy a small amount of it, take some of it home, try it out, and then if you really like that, you can go back and get more, kind of thing. Another thing that I would look for as far as hash rosin goes is the consistency of it. I tend to stay away from things that are like too dry looking, because it usually kind of seems like they've been stored for longer periods of time, and not always, but usually I look for a more like saucy type rosin, and that's kind of like the consistency that I personally go for when making hash rosin.
Greasy rosin then.
Yeah. Oh, most definitely.
That's great advice. And a lot of times you were saying that you look for a granular hash, more of like exclusively resin heads as well. Is this correct?
Yeah, that's kind of the primary thing that I make is air dried ice hash. And if I was looking for that in a store, it would most definitely need to be stored in a refrigerator. What I look for in that is stability. You want it to be stable, because if it's not stable, it could have moisture in it and stuff like that. So as far as having a sample out, I feel like that's pretty important for a shop to have a small sample fresh out of the freezer every day or every few days for the consumer to see, because if it's sitting out at room temp, it's obviously going to grease up, and that's the consistency that I love and a lot of people love and a lot of people look for. Is that oil, that hash that's just melted down into an oil on its own without being tampered with, without being messed with.
Full melt.
And yeah, oh yeah. And a big part of that for me is that, like, when that happens, I like it to stay in a stable form, rather than caking up or waxing up, because a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times that means there could be moisture in the hash. I have seen that some terpene profiles do kind of cake up like that, but not within a couple days, kind of thing. So that's a big thing that I would be looking for, is that, I mean, I think that sample jar is very important, so people can really look at their product and what they're going to be buying. You definitely don't want to take it right out of the freezer or the fridge into room temperature and then open the jar right up because of condensation and things like that. You want to let it gradually go down to room temp. And so that's kind of what I was saying about the sample jar is you'd already have that at room temp when the consumer comes in, and they can visually see, smell, and the product, kind of thing.
I've seen and heard a lot of discussion about that color in particular, and people harvesting early to try to get that lighter color. To me, that equates to the sense of sight, like you were talking about, and almost equals that bag appeal that people look for as well.
Most definitely. Definitely. My experience with that is I've never harvested plants prematurely to get lighter resin, because, like I said, I'm looking for the more so the effects and the true effects of the plant. And not only that, but like, I want to see the plant express itself and the resin express itself. And you don't really get to see that if you harvest it prematurely. I've had strains where I've grown them longer, I've taken them longer than other years, and they really have like brought out extremely unique notes that I've never experienced in those strains before, as well as effects. And for me, that's like really important. And so while bag appeal, is important, especially from a consumer standpoint, I wouldn't necessarily like only look for a light colored hash. And honestly, if there's like if you're looking at a nice water hash in the store, and it's like purely white, like very light colored, I wouldn't necessarily stay away from it, but I would say that it's just it might be a little premature. Still probably worth trying, but just my experience in dabbing other people's products that does look like that, I don't really get much of an effect from it comparatively. You know what I'm saying? I usually, it's very mild and mellow. Yeah. And with that being said, though, some people may be looking for that kind of thing.
American loose trichome gland is not hashish, but it's what you have on the market here. So for me to judge that, you keep it in the fridge because you don't want the resin gland to melt together. Me, I believe that nature wants the resin to melt together. There must be a very good reason behind, and I will never work against nature. Okay? So when to judge it, I put it in my pocket. I put the jar in my pocket. The heat of my body is going to melt the resin. I do that 5 minutes. I take it from my pocket and I look. So what I look first, like most everybody, it's the melt. But the melt represents how much resin is formed inside the resin head. So it's like it's one part of it. But then what is inside that resin is pretty damn important too. How much cannabinoid, how much terpene. I don't get that. I need lab tests to give me that. And beyond that, there is the experience. There is the smell, how it tastes in your mouth when you smoke it, how intense it is, how long does it last, how unique the taste is. This is for me, it's quality more than the melt. I rather have a non-melty hash that blow my palate away than a super melty hash that tastes like fucking hay, because it does happen. So it's like quality is so much element together that it's pretty difficult to define, and it becomes very personal to a certain level. So basically, it's the melt, flavor, and aroma in a nutshell. But the way you experience the aroma and the flavor, it's like wine. It's like eating a good dinner. It's all your senses are in action. You start by smelling and you finish by having the taste in your mouth. What else would count as quality but that experience that you just had?
Right. And there's only so many senses, and you just spoke to two of them. Maybe the only other one would be what it looks like.
What it looks like, it's like if you believe that black is bad, well, my stuff is really, really bad. You know what I mean? It's like what are your knowledge behind the critique or the judgment you're putting on what you're looking at.
Yeah.
Because if you give me white pearl and I keep put it in my pocket, it's not going to be white anymore. When you microplane, I can microplane ebony. If I do it fine enough, it's going to be white. And if it's finer, it disappears. You don't even see it anymore. White is meaningless. Doesn't mean color of the resin gland, doesn't mean anything. It only shows the intensity of the light on the membrane of the gland. That's all it shows. So if you have any genetics that you grow indoor, in a greenhouse, in a shade outdoor or full sun, well, even if you pick at the perfectly right time that you have that full melt, the resin glands are going to be totally different. You're going to go from dark amber to whitish. Is it the colors that tell you, that makes the amount of resin that is formed inside the gland? I don't think so. No. That's the harvesting time. It's like there is 3 days window. If you harvest during those 3 days, the membrane are bursting. If you harvest the same plant 2 weeks early, there is no resin formed inside the gland, literally.
That's right. And so harvest time is very important.
It's everything. Your farmer, when you're an hash maker or an extractor, your farmer and his genetic is everything.
My question was aimed at a large amount of people here in the United States and soon the world that are going to be approaching an adult use / recreation market. And for them to be able to go into a storefront and try to select quality hashish, what would...
You can't touch it. You cannot look at it, dude. You cannot smell it.
I know.
You have to trust. That's the
Yes.
problem. You have to trust a brand or a
Right.
farm or a region where it grows. If you have that, it's shame. It's a shame.
It's the same with flour in a lot of places. A lot of places you can't even smell the
I
flour.
mean, at least you can see the flower at least,
Right.
and they give you a way to smell it, even if it's not great. It gives you a little idea. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Hash, they don't even tell you. They tell you which flower it's coming, but they never tell you if it's indoor, sun-grown, who grew it. You have no data, but the brand. That's very limited. Huh? It's like there is a lot of trust that come into play.
Yeah, and we should get together as a community and develop a standard.
We are trying. I mean, there is a few. We need to be able to grade, even if it was for competition, to be able to grade hashish, to have a system of grading that is accepted by everyone, so that we can speak the same language. You know what I mean, and have the same data to start with. It's super important.
Yes, in total agreement. Now, the star system is something that's great about hashish. This is something that doesn't exist with flour.
Dude, the star, it's like when I was 17 years old, we had the star system in producing country. So when you have a star system in producing country and every grade is very different, you can have 6 stars and it really defines the grade. When you have so much quality, so much level of quality, what that we have today, we have to go way beyond that. It's not just it's good or bad. It's why is it and how much goodness there is in it. You know what I mean? That's the new level. It's like the 5, 6 grade. And they judge only the melt. The melt is just a part of it. I have a scoring system of 200 points. The melt is only 50.
Only 15?
It's huge, but it's only 50.
That's telling right there. Yeah. So I guess to answer the how you would select quality hashish, you have a very traditional method of selecting quality hashish, and I love your method. It's the old method, you know. It's the method.
Yeah, that's I need to touch, and most people really do not like people putting their finger in their jar. Right. It took me a minute to understand, because you want me to check your stuff. I need to touch. I need to see how much it melts. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's like to be able to know. I put a little bit in the palm of my hand. I put my thumb. I close my hand with no pressure, and I wait like 5-10 seconds. When I open, if it's like straight up sticky, that's highest quality. The more pressure, the more heat I have to apply for the resin to really fuse and melt together, the lower the grade. I judge quality by touching it, and by doing this, I smell. And the terp have to go strong, because I'm breaking everything. You know, I'm breaking the gland and everything, so that when you do that, you have the texture feeling, you have the aroma experience at the same time. You never really burn or bring a light. I always touch. Okay. Because it's, I don't know, I have more, I can be more accurate because I use my own sense, not only my eyes. I don't trust my eyes enough. Right, you can cheat the eyes. You cannot cheat your palate, your nose, or the touch. If it burns, it burns. If it's cold, it's cold. You know what I mean? If it's sticky, it's sticky. Looking at it, you won't know.